Everything you're about to hear is just my assessment. It's my opinion, and not to be taken as fact.
Rod Parsley's February 26th, 2025 midweek sermon at World Harvest Church, titled The Supernatural Enabling Power, is yet another glaring example of his well-documented pattern of manipulating Scripture, promoting self-serving narratives, and using underhanded tactics to coerce his congregation into blind submission. This sermon, laced with egotism, spiritual abuse, and theological distortions, demonstrates his relentless pursuit of control and financial gain under the guise of Christian discipleship, twisting and manipulating Scripture. Parsley's handling of Scripture is not just flawed, it is outright deceptive. He butchers Romans 12:1-2, emphasizing self-sacrifice as entry-level Christianity, while simultaneously distorting the concept of renewing the mind. Instead of guiding his congregation toward a Christ-centered transformation, he misuses these verses to belittle critical thinking, making the absurd claim that reasoning is incompatible with faith. His statement, "If you can reason it out, it does not require faith," is a blatant attack on discernment. Scripture repeatedly emphasizes wisdom and understanding, Proverbs 4:7, James 1:5. Yet Parsley condemns reason as a hindrance to faith. This is a manipulative attempt to discourage intellectual examination of his teachings, ensuring that his followers remain mentally and spiritually dependent on his interpretations rather than developing a personal, biblically sound relationship with God. He further distorts Matthew 18:20, absurdly claiming that in God's kingdom, 1 + 1 = 3, because where two are gathered, Jesus is present. This cheap trick to sound profound is a nonsensical stretch of Scripture meant to elevate his own authority rather than provide sound biblical teaching. Additionally, Parsley invokes Dietrich Bonhoeffer's concept of costly discipleship, but completely misses its essence. Bonhoeffer spoke against compromising the gospel with worldly power and self-serving agendas, yet Parsley twists this message to guilt-trip his followers into extreme servitude under his ministry. Underhanded psychological manipulation. Parsley employs a range of manipulative tactics to maintain dominance over his congregation. He bombards them with shame, rebuking those who do not take notes or show enough enthusiasm. His mocking tone, "I don't know why you're not writing down what I'm saying, you must not put any value in it," is not the exhortation of a loving pastor, but the coercion of a manipulator trying to make his words appear more important than they truly are. He also makes exaggerated appeals to hardship, telling his audience they have fought the devil, fought all the demons, just to make it to church. This exaggeration conditions them to see him as a heroic figure whose words are paramount, rather than a mere preacher accountable to sound doctrine. Furthermore, his false humility is transparent. He constantly reminds the audience of his own biblical knowledge, boasting about his studies in 1977 and parading his handwritten notes as a badge of superior spiritual insight. This is not a servant leader encouraging people to study the Bible for themselves. It is a man posturing as a gatekeeper to spiritual truth. Guilt tripping for financial gain. Parsley's message eventually shifts to its inevitable conclusion, financial manipulation. He weaponizes gratitude to push an aggressive fundraising campaign, using guilt and emotional blackmail. He details horrific conditions in the Horn of Africa, juxtaposing them with America's wealth, and then berates his audience for not giving enough. His line, "We eat our seed," is a blatant ploy to make people feel guilty about their own financial situations, framing responsible money management as selfishness. This is a classic prosperity gospel tactic. Shame people into giving under the illusion that their seed will yield supernatural returns. Additionally, the 21-day matching challenge is nothing more than a slick marketing gimmick, leveraging artificial urgency to extract as much money as possible. The repeated emphasis on digital giving options like Venmo and Cash App reveals the true motivation behind the sermon. A well-oiled revenue-generating machine disguised as ministry, ego and idolization of Lester Sumrall. Parsley's unhealthy fixation on the late Lester Sumrall is yet another sign of his distorted priorities. He recounts Sumrall's funeral with an air of self-importance, as if he alone was tasked with carrying the mantle of righteousness. He even boasts that God told him, "You're going to raise the standard," elevating himself as the new spiritual giant in Sumrall's lineage. This is nothing short of self-idolatry. Rather than pointing people to Christ, Parsley continually references his own ministry, his mentors, and his supposed divine calling. His church services increasingly resemble a Rod Parsley appreciation event rather than a gathering focused on worshiping Jesus. Anti-intellectualism and thought control. Parsley openly mocks those who rely on screens or modern technology, yet his ministry heavily relies on digital media to solicit donations. His criticism of social media and secular reasoning is a hypocritical power play. He wants his audience to disengage from outside influences so that he remains their primary source of truth. He demands that his congregation study Scripture, but simultaneously discourages independent thought. His attacks on reasoning, his over-the-top rhetoric against distractions, and his insistence that people must be spiritually reprogrammed are telltale signs of cult-like indoctrination rather than biblical teaching. Final condemnation. Rod Parsley's latest sermon is nothing more than a manipulative spectacle, an exploitative mix of false humility, twisted scripture, financial coercion, and self-aggrandizement. His tactics are not the marks of a humble servant of Christ, but of a self-serving demagogue who seeks control over his followers' minds, finances, and lives. Instead of equipping believers for a genuine walk with Christ, he loads them with shame, guilt, and a warped sense of obligation to his ministry. He preaches sacrifice but demands their money. He exalts faith while suppressing thought. He condemns the world's corruption but mirrors it with his own brand of spiritual manipulation. This was not a sermon. It was a masterclass in coercion. His audience deserves better. They deserve truth, not propaganda, not emotional extortion, and certainly not Rod Parsley's bloated ego masquerading as the voice of God.